NFL trade deadline. Not only did it wrap up today at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, but of course, we had some deals go down the last time we were on the air with you. Amari Cooper going to Buffalo, DeAndre Hopkins going to Kansas City, as well as, of course, the two big ones today. Marshawn Lattimore going from New Orleans to Washington, Zadarius Smith going from Cleveland to Detroit. Josh, biggest takeaway from all this movement in the NFL over the last couple of weeks?
Detroit saw a need and they filled it. Because they didn't want to pay too steep of a price for Myles Garrett. They didn't want to pay a steep price for Max Crosby because if you were wanting to get either one of them, you were gonna have to pay with a couple ones and maybe a two in there. So going and getting Zadarius Smith, is he the caliber of Aiden Hutchinson? No, but I think he still fills that hole and just strengthens Detroit's hold on the NFC as a whole.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the Lions a little later in the show. I actually think the best move of the entire deadline was what the Kansas City Chiefs kicked off the entire couple weeks worth with, which was DeAndre Hopkins moving from Tennessee to Kansas City. I cannot think of a bigger upgrade for a player than DeAndre Hopkins going from Will Levis and that offensive line in Tennessee to Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid and the Kansas City Chiefs. You already have seen the impact he's had on them only 2 games in. There was a lot of people that thought, DeAndre Hopkins had looked washed the last couple of years in Arizona and Tennessee. That to me right now is clearly being defunct. I also think, and we're going to talk about this in the next segment, the Saints are a dumpster fire. And so for Washington to go out, and it's the one need that I think we both agreed with that clearly needed, which was a bona fide number one stud corner on that secondary. I think they clearly feel like them and Philadelphia right there in the NFC East. And, Washington's not waiting around. I had predicted them to be the Houston Texans of this year, and I think that's what we're looking at.
I I think or let me say it like this: Philadelphia is going to keep it close, but I think Washington's ultimately going to win that division. I still think Philadelphia gets in as a wild card, though, which will be very interesting to see who they have to go on the road and face. But that aside, you know who's happiest about this Marshawn Lattimore trade? Mike
Mike Evans.
Evans.
Yes, he is. Of course, when he does come back from Tampa, and Tampa, they unfortunately lost Chris Godwin the last play of the game against Baltimore, and then losing Evans in the same game has hurt them. Obviously, they started the year 4-2. They fell off and have lost 3 straight now. But back to the trade deadline itself, there was a lot of speculation that this year could be a crazy year because there's a lot of bad teams in the NFL this year. And teams didn't sell, I think, as much maybe some people thought they would. The one trade for the life of me, I don't understand. I'm not just saying this as an NFC East and obviously a Cowboy hater as it
I
is
know exactly what trade you're going
as
to,
it
and
is.
I'm just as dumbfounded as you are.
To give up a fourth round pick for a receiver that can't separate, I mean, I don't get it. Detroit gave up West to get Zadarius Smith. So I mean, you tell me. If I'm Carolina, I'm like, of course I'm taking that deal. But yeah, I don't know. But bottom line, I think is this trade deadline wasn't as crazy as people think. Maybe an underrated move that happened right before the deadline is Tre'Davious White going from the Rams to Baltimore to help boost that secondary.
What about Mike Williams going from the Jets to the Steelers? That could be a
It
very sneaky move.
it could be. I still don't believe in Pittsburgh. I know they're 6-2, but listen, we said this, or actually I said it, and I think you agreed, or I don't remember exactly how the conversation went, but I remember saying specifically when we did our NFL predictions in August that Pittsburgh was probably going to start the year 6-2, 6-3, and finish the year 9-8, and I'm still at that point. I think that their hardest games are ahead of them. I don't believe that, Russ is all of a sudden back and this team is going to be a Super Bowl winning team. Preston Smith could help them, I guess, add some depth order more on the defense side of the ball. But Mike Williams has also had a history of being injured, and Pittsburgh does not throw the ball down the field regardless. So I don't know how much that Mike Williams trade is going to impact them.
They might be more inclined to throw the ball more now that they have George Pickens on one side and Mike Williams on the other side. We'll see. But what about the trade Cincinnati made getting Khalil Herbert from the Chicago Bears?
Well, for starters, I don't even want to talk about the Bears. They make my head
Yeah,
hurt.
you want it?
Um,
You sure you don't want to talk about that?
I do because Matt Eberflus needs to be fired immediately. We weren't on the air last week because I had some personal things I had to take care of. But my God, I nearly had a heart attack watching that Hail Mary. And trying to figure out what the hell the Chicago Bears are doing and why Tyreek Stevenson still has a job. But to answer your question about the trade, Herbert is a nice running back, and I may be the only person in the world that thinks this, but I don't think Cincinnati's out of the realm for a wild card spot. And if they knock off Baltimore this Thursday, big ask. But if they do that, if they go into Baltimore and they beat Baltimore on Thursday night, I still think the Bengals are in line to win this division.
Ew. I mean, their game against the Chargers next week got flexed into Sunday Night
Yes, it
Football.
did.
Um, which
Hey,
means the
listen,
charge,
Joe
which
Burrow threw
means
5 touchdown passes this past week and didn't throw one to Jamar Chase. Tell me how
yeah,
that makes sense.
yeah, it doesn't. But you're asking them to go into Baltimore on Thursday night. I don't see that happening.
I think
Not
I listen. I think I got maybe two of the top four quarterbacks in the conference. Cincinnati had them. Now, granted, it was in Cincinnati, but they had them. I think Baltimore made some, plays that Lamar Jackson made special plays. Baltimore obviously creamed Denver on Sunday, but I think they had a bad taste in their mouth from losing to Cleveland. And again, to me, that's just it's any given Sunday. And I've been saying this now for the past few weeks, Josh. You take a look at this league now, and we're seeing it at the trade deadline. Most teams, Kansas City, Buffalo, they went for it. They bolstered up. Washington, they bolstered up. We're at the point where, okay, we may get an upset week to week here or there, like New England upsetting the Jets or, Carolina upsetting New Orleans. But in retrospect, the league always usually comes right back to reality, and we are starting to see the best teams in the NFL separate from themselves.
I mean, I will say this as a Browns fan, I was expecting Denzel Ward to be traded. I thought Greg Newsome would be traded. There was speculation David Njoku might be traded.
They're not going to sell the farm. You don't do. You know what? I'm trying to think of an NFL team, maybe outside of Carolina, has ever just sold at the deadline. Washington did to an extent. Remember, they got rid of Sweat, and then they got rid of the other pass rusher, Chase Young,
Chase Young, yeah.
um, last year at the deadline. But I don't remember a team flat out giving up on, like you would allude to, 3 or 4 players. Amari Cooper and Zadarius Smith were both veterans. Amari was obviously in that contract dispute. Zadarius Smith was probably not coming back next year. So that makes it easier to unload as opposed to young guys, Greg Newsome, Denzel Ward, and even Myles Garrett's name was thrown out there.
Yeah, I thought he might be the one getting traded to Detroit. But again, I understand why the Lions chose Zadarius Smith instead in this case.
Yeah, I just think like Zadarius is a nice player, and by the way, if he's there next year as well, I think he'll fit right in with Hutchinson. I just for me, the DeAndre Hopkins move, I think I know where Kansas City's first loss is going to be, but there's not going to be a lot of losses.
No. I'm thinking their first loss is going to be in Orchard Park against the Buffalo Bills.
You and I are on the same page on that.
Okay. Really, it should have been last night, but well, one, because the right tackle for Kansas City should have been called for a false start, but, the refs love Kansas City, so there's that. And, well, Todd Bowles should have gone for two instead of kicking the extra point. But that's neither here nor there because we didn't put that in the rundown for some odd reason. I don't know. But
Well,
I'm actually surprised in that regard because Tampa is still right there. They're sure it looks like Atlanta's going to win the division, but Tampa is still in the mix for a wild card spot.
I mean, if they lose to San Francisco Sunday, they're 4-6.
Okay. Um, which I think they can beat San Francisco. It's at home in Tampa. San Francisco's having to come cross country. Like, I think that's a winnable game for Tampa, even though
Off a bye week though for San Francisco,
yeah. Um,
and also now Tampa Bay on a short week playing on Monday night.
it's gonna be a tough ask, but I wouldn't just dismiss Tampa. I wouldn't do that.
I'm not dismissing them. I'm just saying I think they're a good team. I just think the Mike Evans and Chris Godwin injuries kind of dampened their season.
Which is why, getting back to what I was going to say as my original point, I'm surprised they didn't trade for a wide receiver today. I thought they would be the ones to, okay, maybe not trade with Carolina because you don't usually see in trades within your own division, but maybe go out and see if you could have gotten a Mike Williams from the Jets or somebody.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of names out there. Again, I think my problem with Mike Williams is he's never healthy.
I'm just using him as an example in this case.
And that's one of the reasons why I think Jim Harbaugh and the Chargers moved off him. And by the way, for all the talk, the Chargers don't have weapons. They sure had weapons on Sunday. That's all I have to say.
Yeah. But no, my bigger point though was not specifically that Tampa needed to trade for Mike Williams, but given that they lost Mike Evans for a few weeks anyway, and Chris Godwin for the rest of the season, I would have thought they would trade for a wide receiver.
So let's talk because we both had predicted that Dennis Allen would be the first head coach fired, and he was the second head coach fired because the Jets went off the rails and fired Robert Saleh for whatever reason I still can't figure out. But Josh, after week 2, the Saints were 2-0, and they were literally the talk of the NFL.
Yeah, you and I were talking about it, like, did we get this NFC South wrong?
Then my Philadelphia Eagles went into New Orleans, and on a fourth down, Jalen Hurts hit Dallas Goedert on a massive crossing route down the field for about 60 yards to set them up for the game-winning touchdown. At that point, that was the difference between maybe Philadelphia being 1-2 and their season potentially teetering after that Saquon Barkley drop against the Falcons, and the Saints being 3-0 to all of a sudden Philadelphia 6-2. The Saints have not won a game. Their roster's a mess. Michael Thomas, who doesn't even play for them anymore, is calling out Derek Carr. The coach is fired. And this is exactly why I predicted the Panthers to be better than the Saints this year, because this is exactly the Saints team I thought we would get.
Both of these teams, the Panthers and the Saints, are total dumpster fires.
So is the team on the screen as well, Vegas. I'll get to them in a minute.
Oh, don't even get me started with the Raiders. I still have no idea how the Browns lost to them in week 4, but that's a different story for another day. But I still remember you and I, following that Cowboys game, you and I both came on here and were like, did we get this NFC South wrong? Like, are the Saints actually going to be a factor? And they've just, like, fallen flat on their face since. So, I don't know. I don't know what to make of the game next week because the Browns play the Saints in New Orleans. That's going to be two bad teams playing each other.
Remember coming into the year when I asked you what exactly the Saints are?
Yes.
I still don't know what they are. They are an old team with bad roster management, somewhat talented defense. Demario Davis is still there, Chase Young is still there, Cam Jordan is still there. Alvin Kamara, I thought if there was a big splashy move, if a team wanted to go out and get a running back today, maybe Alvin Kamara would be a guy that you could target because there's work all there in New Orleans. Because Chris Olave basically went to the hospital because of Derek Carr on Sunday. So
Or
now,
at least that's what Michael Thomas is claiming.
I mean, he pretty much did. That hit was brutal. And so now Alvin Kamara is their only offensive piece. Jake Hanger, or whatever the hell his name is, at quarterback ain't the answer. Spencer Rattler looked like he belonged back in college. And by the way, this team is $80 million over the cap. And so if there was a team worse off than the Cleveland Browns in cap hell, it's the New Orleans Saints. There is no out from this team besides in my opinion, a complete. I'm gonna go a little baseball here. Chicago White Sox esque teardown. I think this team needs a complete. And in the NFL, you can do it quicker. We've seen teams hit on draft picks and hit on players. You got to get a quarterback and you got to get a coach. This team right now, because of their cap situation, they can't really move off players for the next 2 or 3 years. They're a mess. I mean, I don't know anybody who would want this job right now.
Yeah. Like, who knows what other vacancies are going to be open? But
Chicago, please, especially if they lose to New England on Sunday, that vacancy will be open Monday morning at 6 a.m. Eastern Time because I am ready to fire Matt Eberflus. And my one reservation on the Bears this year was their coaching. And, well, DJ Moore walking off the field in the middle of a freaking play.
So there's probably going to be at least 3 openings: the Jets, the Bears, and the Saints. Maybe the Giants. We'll see what happens there with Brian Dable, but I'm going to say it.
Let me ask you, speaking of openings, there's 2. So, I mean, we all know Carolina, right? Dave Temper's a madman. Would they get rid of Dave Canales after 1 year? I don't know. I feel bad for him. And I do think the one bad team that we have to watch is the one that's close to us in Cleveland. What does happen with Kevin Stefanski and what does happen with general manager Andrew Berry? Because I don't freaking know. I can't tell you the answer right now.
The Haslams have so much egg on their face right now, you can't even see their faces. It is ridiculous. Stay out of football operations at Jimmy and Haslam. Stay out.
Haslam should stay out of basketball operations too, if you get what I'm saying.
Yes. Because think about this for a second. The Haslams also own the Columbus Crew. They just got eliminated by the New York Red Bulls, but the Crew have won 2 MLS Cups in last season and in 2020, if I'm not mistaken. So, hey, they're owned by the Haslams, and they've won championships because the Haslams are actually staying away. They're not getting involved. Like, we were having success in 2014 with Brian Hoyer as our quarterback, Mike Payton as our head coach. I think it was Shanahan as our offensive coordinator. Mm-hmm. What happened? The Haslams got involved and said, no, we want to see Johnny Manziel on the field. What happens? We get embarrassed by the Cincinnati Bengals like 30-0. Stay out of football operations, Jimmy and D Haslam. We will be so much better off without you.
So I want to address real quick the Raiders side of things because Norv Turner came out of nowhere. Did not expect that name to show up on my timeline today, that he is back as a senior offensive assistant. Obviously, his son Scott now is going to be the interim offensive coordinator. They get rid of Luke Getsy. We all know him as the Bears OC last year. But this team has no identity. I said it going into the year. I want to go out of their pieces. Didn't love their quarterback at all. Now they lose Devontae Adams. So they need to replace that production. I still think Brock Bowers is a very good tight end. Josh, I know everybody wanted Antonio Pierce to get that job, but I could see a scenario, speaking of firings here. What if the Raiders take a big swing here? And I don't know if you know where I'm going with this, but Sanders times two, Dion Shador, Las Vegas, 2025 in the National Football League.
The Raiders would have to get the number 1 pick probably for that to happen. Unless, like, whoever ends up with the first overall pick
Well,
doesn't go with Shador.
right now, I mean, off the top of my head, if you take a look at the NFL standings, I know New England has one win. I think they are the only one-win team now in the week with Carolina's win. Or no, New England does have 2 wins. I apologize.
Yes.
So you take a look at teams. Does the worst team in the week has 2 wins? Correct? Yeah.
Yeah.
So everybody is brought it up. So it is a real possibility, I think, for the Raiders to just get that number 1 pick.
They could. But do you I get that Shador is going to be there, but do you pass up Quinn Ewers? Do you pass up Cam Ward?
I'll tell you what, I read a report the other day that Quinn Ewers is a 3rd-round pick.
Okay.
I don't. It sounds like a lot of these scouts are down on these quarterbacks. It sounds like Shador Sanders is like clear number 1. Some people think Cam Ward may not even go in the top 10, from what I've been reading. Again, this is all going to change. So,
oh yeah. But just to go back on the Saints super quick, think about this. Derek Carr was the quarterback for the Raiders. What happened? Dennis Allen got fired. Derek Carr was the quarterback in New Orleans. What happened? Dennis Allen got fired. Coincidence? I think not.